Many of us have taken American history classes throughout our educational career, K through 12 and college. But how many of us know about the life and legacy of Alonso Perales?
Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Today I'm having a conversation with Dr. Cynthia Orozco, professor of history at Eastern New Mexico University, Ruidoso, and author of several award-winning books. I tell you, it is so inspiring to witness the publication of this important book about this significant American leader. We need more biographies about Latinos and Latinas. I hope you're inspired by my conversation with Dr. Orozco about the life and legacy of Alonso Perales. See show notes for more information about Dr. Cynthia Orozco and how to purchase this important book. Please subscribe to the Empowerment Zone podcast. And as always, please give us a rating on Apple Podcast. Your support will ensure that we continue our journey in empowerment and impact. Today, we have Dr. Cynthia Orozco with us today on the Empowerment Zone. And as you all know, we're all about empowerment and impact here. And Dr. Cynthia Orozco is a historian, and she's a good friend of mine and busy writing that history. And she is author of the book Pioneer of Mexican American Civil Rights, Alonso Perales. And it's really great to have her here today to talk about Alonso Perales because, as many of you readers out there know, there are very few biographies and autobiographies about people of Mexican American descent, people of Latino, Latina descent. And it's important that we have these books out there to tell our story, right? We need writers who tell the story of African Americans and Latina Americans so that we can learn about the greatness that we have in our communities. And one of the reasons I believe there's so few biographies and autobiographies about people of Latina descent is because, we just recently started producing scholars in the Latino community. When you look at the rise of the ethnic studies movements in the 1960s, that's when we really started having universities produce historians who studied Mexican American, Latina history. And so it's great to have one of the pioneers in this effort. I know at one point in time when I was in graduate school, it was less than 15 Latinas who had PhDs in history. And I was in graduate school in the 90s. I don't know what the number is, but it's still a very small number. And so now we have these scholars out here who are doing some great work. And I'm so happy to talk about Alonso Perales, but even more excited about talking to my colleague, Dr. Cynthia Orozco. Hi, Cynthia. Welcome to the Empowerment Zone.
Good morning, Ramona. Good morning, Dr. Houston. Thanks for having me this morning.
I'm really happy that you would join me on the Empowerment Zone for the second time. You have written several books, No Mexicans, Women, or Dogs Allowed, The Rise of the Mexican American Civil Rights Movement, which was the University of Texas's Press best-selling academic book in 2010 to 2020. And you did speak to us in our one of our previous seasons of the Empowerment Zone about your book, Agent of Change, Adela Slos-Vento, Mexican American civil rights activist and Texas feminist, which was the winner of the Liz Carpenter Award for Best Book in Texas Women History in 2020, and you're also co-editor of the Mexican Americans in Texas book. So you've been quite busy over the last few years. So tell us, before we get to talking about Alonso Perales in your book, can you tell us how did you end up becoming a scholar in American history and more specifically in Mexican American history?
Yes, I first attended Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, but I was not interested in the history that was presented to me at the time. However, when I attended the University of Texas at Austin, I took my first Chicano history class, and we had to write a 20-page paper doing original research, and that's how I got connected to Chicano or Mexican American history. So since 1978, as a sophomore, I have been conducting original research. And actually, the topic of this book, Alonso Perales, believe it or not, I used his papers in his widow's home way back around 1979. So I was introduced to him very early on.
So tell us, why did you choose to write about Alonso S. Perales specifically, even though you may have been introduced to him and his work in 1979? Years later, what made you focus on him as a person to study and write a book on versus the many other Mexican American leaders during his era?
Well, I was actually commissioned by Arte Público Press out of Houston to complete a biography on him. Another scholar had been selected, Dr. Francisco Rosales, who had worked on a biography for about 7 years, but he passed. And so then I was asked to complete the work. And really, even before Rosales had been selected, I was the national expert on Perales. I had used his materials also for a senior honors thesis, and my dissertation and my book, No Mexicans Allowed, relied heavily on the Perales collection. So Perales was also somebody that I had written about. We had in 2009, the Perales collection finally came to the University of Houston. Perales had died in 1960. So all those years had gone by where the Perales papers were in the private hands of the family. Once the papers got to the University of Houston, there was a Perales conference organized by Arte Público Press, and I wrote a paper on Perales in the 1930s. Francisco Rosales also contributed, and then a book was published, edited by the scholar and attorney Michael Olivas. So I already had a long history of working on the history of Perales.
So tell us about Alonso Perales. What makes him such a significant person in not only Mexican American history and Texas history, but American history?
Yes, I would actually argue that Alonso Perales was the most significant Latino of the 20th century. And I do so primarily because he was the principal founder of the LULAC organization. LULAC stands for League of United Latin American Citizens, which was founded in 1929 in Corpus Christi, but today is a major national Latino civil rights organization in the United States and Puerto Rico. So for that fact alone, and the extensive work that LULAC has done across the nation in so many places and in so many lawsuits, that is why Perales, I would argue, is the most significant. And I would even say that he is the closest thing that we would have had to a Dr. Martin Luther King. Perales was active as, first of all, as the founder of LULAC, but even before that, this is a young man born in Alice, Texas in 1898. His father's a shoemaker, his mother's a homemaker. but he loses his parents and a brother before age 10. And so he ends up growing up with a family in Alice, Texas, the Trevino family, completes an 8th grade education, then moves on to San Antonio, attends a business school there where he learns white collar business skills, is drafted into World War I, but does not see action, then goes to Washington, D.C. to work with the Department of Commerce, finishes high school, continues his studies in college, and then gets a law degree and returns to Texas in the mid-20s and goes on to establish LULAC in 1929. However, even before he establishes LULAC in 1929, he serves as a U.S. diplomat and worked in 13 different missions for the United States government in the Caribbean, in Mexico, Central America, and in Latin America, while he himself is in his 20s. Moreover, beginning in 1919, he begins his work as a writer, writing op-ed pieces and letters to the editor. So from beginning in 1919 all the way to his death in 1960, he is writing for newspapers and even served as a columnist for the La Prensa newspaper of San Antonio, which was the most important Spanish language newspaper in Texas from around 1930 to the 60s. He also served as a columnist for La Voz Católica, the Catholic Voice, primarily in the 1950s, because he was a good Catholic. So he was a founder of LULAC and a major civil rights activist. He was an attorney addressing many important cases. He was a public intellectual, and he also wrote 2 books. He wrote a book called In Defense of the Mi Raza, In Defense of My People, and also another book called Are We Good Neighbors? So he did all of that. And really, especially for San Antonio, he is the most important mover and shaker in Mexican-American civil rights in San Antonio and actually throughout Texas.
You know, when you look at the history of Mexican American activists and prominent individuals, it's amazing that many of them come through San Antonio at some point in time in their development and evolution. So, what was it about Alonso S. Perales that made him such an impactful leader, in your opinion?
Well, a lot of things. First of all, most of the Mexican or Mexican American community cannot speak English. So number one, he's bilingual. Number two, he has a college education, which is extremely, extremely unusual at the time. He is a smart, ambitious, caring man. He also was 6'1", so he would have commanded stature. He was a great orator and effective writer. And he was a brave man. Again, remember in the 1920s, we have a resurgence of the KKK. We still have some lynching in the Mexican community as well as the Black community. And it's a very difficult time because it is the era of Jim Crow or Juan Crow. And that is his mission. His mission is to attack the disempowerment of the Mexican descent community. Really, he is the formative leader of what we now call the Mexican American civil rights movement.
Yes, and a lot of people don't recognize or don't know that Texas segregated both the African American and Mexican American communities. So the Texas system had actually a triracial system, and many people of Mexican American descent were desegregated against, as you explained. We have Juan Crow and Jim Crow. And so a lot of people present day don't know that many people of Latino descent in Texas suffered many of the similar atrocities that the African American community suffered, including lynchings. And here as you put him in his historical context and see the difficulty and the bravery it takes to really address issues within the Latino community, the Mexican American community, you see how Alonso Perales is really one of those significant leaders of his era. So, as you wrote this book, I'm really curious, as a historian, what did you find out about Alonso S. Perales that really was something that really made a significant impact on you? You know, something new, something that you discovered about his life that you didn't know previously, having been introduced to him as so early in your professional career.
Well, I didn't really know how active he was. And so I would say that this is a man who every single day of his life was writing letters, was lobbying politicians, was preparing legislation, was writing congressional testimony, was doing pro bono work for the poor Mexican descent community. So he was major activist. But really, the most important thing that I discovered about him was a case that he worked on. And he volunteered to work on a case for a woman named Rachel Gonzalez. And Rachel Gonzalez had killed her lover, who apparently was a married man and did not tell her that he was married. She told him, "I'm going to kill you," and she actually did kill him. Alonso Perales volunteered to work on that case. And he actually, I think it was very interesting that he was very much a Catholic and a Christian, but he believed that she was wrong. And I think he saw her as someone who had been dishonored according to the Catholic or Christian moral authority of the time, but also as somebody who would have no father and no money to raise that child. So the bottom line is that Rachel Gonzalez got off for murder. And in Perales's letter, one that he writes, J.T. Canales being the first Latino in Texas to receive a law degree in 1898, University of Michigan. He writes Canales and calls it a women's rights case. To me, that was quite striking. That's really the most memorable thing that I recall about Alonso Perales. But Perales was so active, and he was active from 1919 all the way to 1960. You mentioned the importance of San Antonio. San Antonio would not have transformed the way that it did had it not been for Perales, because it is really the LULAC that makes major changes there. Perales also mentored people like Gus Garcia, who's another prominent attorney. He mentored Carlos Cadena, another attorney. He mentored Henry B. Gonzalez, who is our first Latino in the Texas State Senate in the 1950s.
And went on to become congressman too.
Yes, the first Mexican American congressman from Texas. And then he also mentors Vilma Martinez. When she is 15 or 16, she is working or hanging out in his office. She goes on to receive her degree, I believe, from Columbia, and then becomes the president of the Mexican American Legal and Defense Fund and works with the Chicano Rights Project. So all of those key leaders, Albert Peña as well, Albert Peña doing good coalition work with the Black community in San Antonio, being an anti-war advocate during the Vietnam War, being the first Latino on the county commission there. So many of the first that occur in San Antonio are really connected to Perales.
You know, I always look at San Antonio as the equivalent of what Atlanta is to African Americans, Latino. San Antonio is that to the Mexican American community. I mean,
you're correct. I say the same thing. I said that after my first visit to Atlanta. We did see a rise of a Mexican American middle class there in San Antonio. We saw the rise of the LULAC organization and many organizations that really were founded there. There's a major school reform movement that Council 16 of LULAC starts, but which goes on to become its own entity and is responsible for creating more schools and better schools, because of course the Mexican schools, the segregated Mexican schools that existed, were quite inferior and inadequate. So the Southwest Voter Registration Project comes out of San Antonio. We already mentioned all these various leaders, but really you are correct. Atlanta and San Antonio are the same.
That's an idea for you and me. We need to get together and tell that story, right?
Right. Like I need more work.
So, what do you think that, you're the author of this book. So what do you think that activists, like current professionals, current people who are really devoted to empowerment and impact, what do you think they can learn from reading this book about Alonso S. Perales?
Well, one of the first things is that Perales took advantage of every single opportunity he had. Okay, so he went and got that white collar skills from this business college. Okay, so obviously education is one of them. Okay, and in addition, he would do whatever he could to continue his learning. He even attended the college classes that were offered by UNAM. That's like a college out of Mexico that came to San Antonio. San Antonio was the only place that had those kinds of courses on Mexican history.
And UNAM stands for Universidad Autónoma Nacional de Mexico. Yeah, so she's saying UNAM, UNAM. Yeah, so that's that's the major university that has several branches out of Mexico, the country. So I just wanted to tell our audience that.
Yes, and so he was highly proactive. He himself would initiate letters to the editor, op-eds. He would seek out radio opportunities. He would seek out any way that he could make an impact. So he's not passive. He's an assertive man. And he visited regularly with mayors and politicians advocating for desegregation. He's a significant man. And I think the book also is very balanced, meaning that there's chapters on religion, there's chapters on his family, there's chapters on his work as a diplomat, as a public intellectual, as an attorney. And he mastered all of those areas. So he was multi-issued all the time, from having clean yards and sanitation and fighting tuberculosis to Pan-Americanism. He also attended the founding of the United Nations in 1945. He worked as a consul or consulate for Nicaragua. So he's multifaceted, multi-issue. He cares about everything, including whether poor boys have shoes or clothes. So he's at the local to the international or level as well.
I'm so glad you give a holistic view of Alonso S. Perales in your book, because a lot of times, many times in in some studies we don't get to see the whole person, and you study, him in his religious life, his personal life, as well as his professional life. And so we can learn about all, the evolution of this person. But not only that, what you just talked about being a multifaceted, multi-issue individual, that you don't have to choose, because all of this is interrelated: education,
Yes.
educational empowerment, political empowerment, financial empowerment, as well as health and wellness. How are you going to be able to even work for community empowerment if you're sick? And here
Yes.
you have this person addressing all of those issues, and really, not only that, what you stated, taking advantage of opportunities to make an
Yes.
impact and to learn continuously, being a continuous learner.
Right.
There are so many ways to make an impact, and it seems like he used all the tools at his disposal to empower and impact his community.
Yes. Now, the one thing that is problematic, the one of the main problematics about Perales is that when the LULAC was founded in 1929, it did not include women. And compare this, for example, with the NAACP,
Mhm,
which was biracial, but also included women.
mhm,
So Black women were empowered
mhm.
to a greater extent than Mexican American women were empowered in the LULAC organization.
You know, and
Separate councils for women that were founded in the early 30s came to an existence, but they remained separate mostly until the 1970s.
I'm glad you brought up that point, because that goes back to culture. Uh, you know, the African American community is very different culturally in that respect. We know that the Mexican American community, one of the issues is, the machismo that is prevalent in the community, and the certain roles that women are supposed to have. Not that we don't have that in the Black community, we still have our struggles, but there is clearly some cultural dynamics that differ in the community. And it's amazing to see that it took until the 1970s, with LULAC being founded in 1929, for that dynamic to change. And
Yes, really, it's the feminist movement that brings that awareness to Chicanas who are questioning why are there separate councils, and we too can be full leaders within the organization.
Mhm, mhm. And don't get me wrong, we still have challenges in the Black community when it comes to women's leadership, which that's a whole nother conversation that you and I can have. But just speaking, going back to Alonso Perales and the critique, that's one of the valid critiques of him, not being inclusive of women in his leadership. Well, tell me, for the last question, as an author, what are your aspirations? What do you hope to accomplish through this book?
Well, I'm hoping that the name Alonso Perales can become more of a household name. It's going to take many years to get the word out. I am happy that the relatively new organization, the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, which is also in San Antonio, by the way, is rolling out a traveling exhibit about Perales based on the book. So this will go to malls, it'll go to public schools. And I'm hoping that we can begin to appreciate the so very important work that LULAC has done over all these years. LULAC will be celebrating its 100th anniversary in 2029. So the introduction to Perales is also an introduction to LULAC and its significant contributions for 100 years.
So, Dr. Orozco, tell me, I I am a big advocate, and I know you are a big advocate for a college education. So, let's give students some advice. What strategies would you give students to ensure that they're successful in college? And could you preface that answer with what college or colleges did you attend? What were your major or majors? And then what degrees did you receive at those institutions?
Yes, I attended Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, and my major there was sociology. And then I attended the University of Texas at Austin, where my major was history. And then I obtained both my master's and doctorate from UCLA in Los Angeles a while back. My one of my suggestions or strategies is about finances. Finances are actually a very important part of becoming a successful student. And my thinking nowadays is that students have to strategize in terms of getting scholarships, in terms of working, in terms of saving, in terms of figuring out ways to not accumulate a massive student debt when they finish. A good way to disempower yourself is to have a massive student debt after you finish college. By all means necessary, avoid a massive student debt.
Great advice. It costs to get a college education. So you need to be educated before going in there to make sure that you avoid and limit college debt. And as Dr. Cynthia Orozco explained, there are many ways to do this, many strategies to use. Apply for scholarships. Make sure you get opportunities to work to make money, and make sure you save money for college. Thank you so much, Dr. Cynthia Orozco. It's great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.